Welcome inside this edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Old National Bank. I'm your host, Rick Pizzo. Michael Huff joins me shortly. We'll look ahead to a key weekend on the Big Ten baseball diamond. Also excited to chat with Maryland headman Michael Locksley ahead of the Terps' spring game coming up this weekend. But we begin with the big story, and a story that everyone is talking about these days. It is the eve of the Big Ten and the NFL draft. Ohio State's C.J. Stroud in the mix for the number 1 overall pick, but seems to be trending in an opposite direction. More likely he was that pick about a month ago. A lot of mock drafts have potentially 10 selections, or 4 selections, I should say, inside the top 10 from the Big Ten. Could see double-digit selections from this league inside the first round. And how about Iowa's Lucas Van Ness? Never started for the Hawkeyes, but continues to rise. Could be a top 15, some say a top 10 selection in this year's draft. And for much more on that draft, welcome in our good friend Greg Cosell of NFL Films to help break down some of these guys. Greg, first and foremost, enjoy doing this with you each and every year. I know this is a time of the year where guys like you don't get much sleep, do you?
That is true. There's not enough hours in the day, Rick. You know, believe me, I wish I could watch 500 guys, but because, you know, the NFL season, I do my show during the season and I'm focused on the NFL. I don't really start till around the Super Bowl. So I try to get as many guys done as I can, but I do them in detail. So I'm not just looking, 20 plays or one game. So it takes a little bit of time.
Always a lot of talk, Greg, about the quarterbacks. And this year is a very quarterback-heavy draft. We expect to hear many names very early on Thursday night. Now, about a month ago, as I kind of mentioned, it seemed like the Panthers were kind of leaning towards C.J. Stroud. Then we heard Bryce Young had overtaken him as a likely number 1 pick. Last couple of days, we're hearing some chatter about Will Levis maybe going ahead of C.J. Stroud as well. Some of this clearly, as you know, could be misinformation passed out by teams. There's a lot of jockeying. What's the real story with the quarterbacks, and where do you think Stroud fits in this class?
Well, Rick, I can only speak to the tape. The other stuff, I usually don't follow closely. I mean, I know about it because I don't live under a rock, but just from a tape standpoint, I really like C.J. Stroud. I think he has an innate feel for something that is very hard to do, that a lot of quarterbacks coming into the NFL can't do, and that's throw with pace and touch. I mean, you cover the Big Ten, so you know he makes a lot of those sort of what we call firm touch throws, feathering throws, layering throws. He's really good at that, and he attacks the middle of the field, which is a prerequisite in the NFL where, in a sense, the field shrinks because the hash marks are closer, but he attacks the middle of the field, and he's very willing to make difficult throws at the intermediate and deeper levels, and he has really precise ball location. The term natural thrower is overused a lot, as you well know, but C.J. Stroud is really an easy natural thrower of the football. I liked his tape from last year when I watched it, and I loved his tape from this year. I think he's a really good prospect.
I also think he's a guy that has to impress in the interview rooms and through that process. Talk with him a lot of times, a really mature young man. Of course, his favorite target 2 years ago was Jackson Smith-Njigba, but Smith-Njigba didn't get many snaps last year dealing with that injury. And so that's led to a lot of debate this year about where he kind of fits inside, again, a very talented wide receiver draft. Where do you find Smith-Njigba?
Yeah, I love Smith-Njigba. I watched all of his targets from 2021 and some games as well. This year, I think he only played 60 snaps, so you didn't learn a lot. But obviously in 2021, 104 of his 113 targets came out of the slot. So you think of him as a slot receiver. The question is, can he be more than that? Because he's almost 6'1". He's not a little guy. You think slot receivers very often 5'9", 170. He's almost 6'1", close to 200 pounds. He has incredible short area quickness. I mean, the term that I heard, and I love it, and I would use it with him for sure, is he is a separation generator. He creates tremendous separation on his routes. Now, he's not a vertical guy. He's not an explosive take-it-to-the-house guy, but he is really good in the short to intermediate area, and I'm very curious to see if teams see him as more than a slot guy. But from the slot, he's a master.
I think he helped himself for sure with the 40 that he ran at Pro Day. And I got to tell you, I still think back to that Rose Bowl game against Utah. It was the greatest individual performance I've ever seen by a wide receiver, certainly on a stage like that. All right, let's go up front, Greg, because folks love to talk about quarterbacks and skill position guys, but you talk to GMs and head coaches, and they need to load up front because a lot of times those are the hallmark of championship teams. And the Big Ten seems to have two guys, Peter Skoronski of Northwestern and Paris Johnson, who could likely be plug-and-play guys, but there is some concern, I guess, with Skoronski's arm length. Could that potentially affect where he goes in the draft, and could it even move Johnson ahead of him?
I don't know if it'll affect where he goes, Rick, because he's a really solid football player. I mean, at the end of the day, when you watch offensive linemen, I've learned this over the years, and I never fancied myself as an offensive line expert. I've tried to learn from people a lot smarter than I am. But he gets people blocked, and he does it really efficiently. He rarely gets beat. But there's no question when you talk to offensive line coaches that the 32.25-inch arm length is a concern at the tackle position. So I know a lot of people believe he should move inside to guard, and I sort of fall into that category. I think with the speed of edge rushers and the athleticism of edge rushers, you need more length with your arms to really stop them with their initial attempts to attack the outside. So I think he could be one of those guys that you could, you think back to Brandon Sheriff coming out of Iowa. He was a left tackle at Iowa, and he immediately was placed at guard by Washington, and I think he became an All-Pro in year one. And I think that Skoronski could be that guy. But he's a really, really good player. There's just an efficiency to his game that is tremendous. And then Paris Johnson, he's a really interesting guy. I guess just based on film, I may not be as high on Paris Johnson as some. I don't believe he's an elite athlete. People talk about him being an elite athlete. I don't quite see that. I think of elite athletes in the NFL like Trent Williams and Laramie Tunsil. I don't think Johnson is quite that guy. I think he needs to get stronger. He's a little narrow-based. There's a player who really, to me, exploited him a bit, who we'll probably talk about momentarily. Lucas Van Ness really sort of exploited Paris Johnson with speed to power rush, and he just shoved Johnson back into the pocket. So I think Johnson's a good prospect. And this is not a great offensive tackle class, and it's a premium position, so he will get drafted high.
Greg, that's a professional television segue. You must have known we were going Lucas Van Ness as the next topic. He may be rising faster than anybody else, certainly any defensive player on this draft board. What's behind that rise?
It's funny because he played at Iowa where he didn't start, and that's sort of the Ferentz philosophy. A lot of times guys who aren't seniors don't get to start. He's an interesting guy because he played outside, he played inside. He's a power player. That's his game. His game is built on strength and power. In the run game, he controls and displaces offensive linemen. On the perimeter as an edge rusher, it's speed to power. He's much more, Rick, of a straight line linear athlete than a bender. But I think people feel that he's an ascending player in the sense that 2, 3, 4 years down the road, that there's going to be a lot more to his game. Now, he weighed 272 at the combine. Sometimes I think to myself, can you get this guy to 285 and move him all around, and particularly inside? Can he be, and this is not an apples to apples comparison, so I don't want anybody to fall out of their chair, but can he be a J.J. Watt type player if you can get him to 285 or 290 because he's so strong?
Well, I think that's a fair comparison, Greg, because the first couple of years that J.J. Watt was at Wisconsin, or starting his career as a fullback, even before he got to Madison, there weren't a lot of folks talking about what he was able to do. And you look at Van Ness, and I know it sounds funny, he's a skinny-ish 272, you see the area that he could put on 10 or 15 pounds. So I think he makes some really good points there. The Big Ten was just loaded in the secondary a year ago. We've heard already about Devin Witherspoon, Deontay Banks, Joey Porter Jr. It seems like Witherspoon right now is the guy that teams are kind of drooling over as someone they can put in that defensive backfield maybe right away. What do you see when you watch him on tape?
Yeah, Witherspoon is he's a feisty, competitive guy. You'd love him on your team. He's a pain in the you-know-what, Rick. That's the way he plays. He has quick, sudden, explosive feet. He's aggressive. He's decisive. I mean, he's got the highest level of competitive toughness that you want to have in a player. Obviously, he's 5'11 and a half. He only weighs 181. He's physical. This, even though he at his I guess his special pro day he ran a 4.42, he doesn't quite play like that. He's not necessarily fast in terms of vertical speed. That might be the only thing where I say a little bit of a question surrounding him, but I think you love the way this guy plays. And I think he can be a quality NFL corner. But I got to tell you, I love Deonte Banks. I just, I know you saw him a lot this year, Big Ten guy, but Deonte Banks to me is everything you want in today's NFL at corner. He's long, he's athletic. His athletic testing measurables were off the charts. You need to be able to play press man in today's NFL. This guy, to me, is your classic press man corner. The one thing about the Big Ten that you love is you love when guys can go up against Ohio State, because I think Ohio State has every five-star receiver known to man. So you love to see, teams go up against Ohio State. And Deonte Banks had some great matchups with Marvin Harrison, and they were really fun to watch. And Deonte Banks made some really good plays against Harrison. So I really like Deonte Banks a lot.
All right, Greg, before we wrap up, I want to get into some guys who have mock draft experts kind of confused. And by that, I mean some have them in the first round, some have them maybe in the third round. One guy is Adetomiwa Adebaware from Northwestern, who kind of really came on late in the year. The other guy is Brenton Strange, the tight end from Penn State, who I know a lot of people love. And my understanding, Greg, is that you also really like the Nittany Lion tight end.
Love him. It's funny. I was watching his tape. And I started out by watching the Auburn game, and man, did he have some blocks against Auburn. He just pancaked people. And of course, I wanted to see him as a receiver. I ended up watching a lot of games, and I watched all his pass targets. I really like this kid. I think he's smooth. He's athletic. He's a really good blocker. And, as I was watching him, believe it or not, who I thought of? And this is coming out of college. That's the way I do this. You never know what a guy's going to turn into in the NFL. I thought he was very similar stylistically to George Kittle coming out of Iowa. Now, keep in mind, Kittle was a fifth-round pick who only caught 20 and 22 balls in his last 2 years at Iowa. Now, Kittle's 40 time was faster than Strange, but every other athletic testing measurable was pretty much right on the money. And I really like Brenton Strange a lot as an NFL prospect.
All right, so I mentioned Adebaware, John Michael Schmitz, the center from Minnesota, also up there. Illinois safety Sidney Brown was remarkably productive. Do any of those guys intrigue you in terms of their ability to maybe be a second or third round pick and then come in and contribute right away?
Adebaware will probably be a day 2 pick simply because his athletic testing measurables were off the charts. And he does show that at times on tape with burst, with speed. I mean, you see it on tape. I think he has a ways to go to be a really good football player. But when you watch him play, you do see a desirable combination of sort of confined space force, strength. He's got powerful hand usage. He's got sudden movement. I mean, to me, he's one of those guys that you draft him with the idea that you can really develop and cultivate him because it's there in his body. He just needs to become a better football player, snap after snap.
Great stuff, as always, from Greg Cosell of NFL Films, making us smarter before Thursday's NFL draft. Now, for those that don't know, Greg went to Amherst. That's a NESCAC school. Those guys are always going to make you smarter, says another guy who went to a NESCAC school. Greg, we really appreciate the time. Enjoy the moments leading up to the draft. And on Friday, I hope you finally get a chance to take a little bit of a breather and get yourself some personal downtime.
That'll happen next week, Rick, but I appreciate that so much. Thanks.
That good-looking dude on the promo is head coach Michael Locksley, but we prefer to talk to him in real life, or at least as real as Zoom gets. So, Locks, good to be with you. I know there's no such thing as rest for college football coaches right now, but what have the last couple of months been like for you and your staff before getting ready for this weekend spring game?
Hectic. The way the calendar now works for us and the transfer portal windows and grad transfers coming in January. We got done with the Duke's Mayo Bowl and welcomed about 16 new people in here January 2nd, and it's been work all the way through with the culmination of it being our spring game this Saturday, the red and white game Saturday here in the Shell.
So, Locks, we've seen everything with spring games so far this year. We've seen basically glorified practices where nobody gets touched. We've seen 11 on 11 with quarterbacks being live. What should we expect to see this Saturday in College Park?
We try to make it as game-like as we can. As competitive as possible, with some limited number of things. Obviously, we don't have the depth to get a ton of plays. So what we'll try to do is basically put a stronger offense as we can with the defense, and then a stronger defense as we can with an offense, and kind of have it basically become ones versus ones, twos versus twos. The quarterbacks won't be live. We'll have normal scoring unless, and I'm knocking on wood that tomorrow, because we do have a practice and we're about at our wits' end with O-linemen. And so to take a little bit out of Dion's book, and the portal window's still open and we need some linemen here in Maryland. But we've got 2 sets of O-line, and if we can stay healthy, we'll have a normal competitive spring game, but the clock will definitely be running.
Yeah, no
question.
Like no
clock,
question about
play
it.
Clock rules.
We can't get anybody hurt. Not on the day before the spring game. Not at the spring game. Everybody's got to be as healthy as you possibly can before you get ready for the fall. Mike, I know you've been quoted before saying when there are coordinator changes, sure, guys come in and they have influence, but you're going to play the Maryland brand of football that you envision regardless of who is on that assistant staff. So with Coach Gaddis, with Coach Sullivan, what do they bring? How do they affect what you guys are doing?
Yeah, from the time I worked with Josh at Alabama and him knowing the foundation of what we do on offense, he's had a chance to work with some great coaches, obviously under Jim Harbaugh and Mario Cristobal, and I'm sure he's taken some of those things. And what I've seen is obviously the foundation is what we have done here since I've gotten here, and that won't change. But we're always able to add to our packages, and Josh has been able to do that. You think about the explosive offenses that Summy coached and coordinated, whether it be a head coach at Houston and A&M with Johnny Manziel and some of those great players at Houston and Texas A&M, as well as, the time he's coordinated and been a part of some great stuff at Oklahoma. He's brought things to the table. And, a lot of people have slept on the hire of Latrell Scott, one of the youngest guys to take an FCS team to the championship game at Richmond. And Latrell has brought a lot of knowledge as well to that offensive package. And it's been really fun seeing this thing come together this spring, and we're excited about the direction.
Locks, how do you manage a guy's expectations when they're as high as Leah's are for himself, and you balance his unbelievable ability with the fact that you don't want him to overload himself too much? I'm not asking you to be a psychologist because I know you're a football coach, but it's part of the deal with a guy that is that talented.
Yeah, part of it is the psychology of it. And for us, the big thing we ask our quarterback is take care of the football, distribute it to the playmakers. You don't have to force things. And Lee has really continued each and every year to get better and better at taking what they give us and understanding how to play situational football. And, I expect you see another jump in Leah. We've surrounded him again, though we lost some pieces off of this offense a year ago. But the people we've brought in, we've surrounded him again with a really good cast of characters that should allow him to continue to take the next step as he continues to grow within our system.
I know some of those guys around him, Mike, have been so talented. You mentioned some of the guys that you're losing, and they were longtime contributors to this program. But that receiver room has always been an area of strength for you, no matter where you've been. How does that shape up this year?
Yeah, this has been a very pass-friendly system over the last 10, 15 years with the type of players that have played in this system. And once again, we found some talented guys in that room. We've developed some talented guys in that room. And so I expect us to continue to be able to be a team that can pitch and catch. The thing that I love that Josh has brought to the table as our primary play caller, and Summy and Latrell all becoming part of that offensive side of the ball, is I've got some experienced coaches that have coached in some big games. Everyone talks about the close games we had against some of the top teams in our league, but now it's time to not be close and figure out ways to win those games. And all three of those guys and their experience really should bode well for us to put together great plans and how to attack.
Obviously, he had some great lift in the run game last year. Roman came on and just had a phenomenal year. And obviously, the best part about younger guys is as long as they don't go to the portal, they have eligibility and they're coming back into your program. What does that mean? And he's not by himself. He has help back there as well. What does that mean for your offense in terms of the run game in 2023?
Yeah, I want to see us take the next step. And a year ago, we talked about that receiver room. And I also said, we've got a young running back room. But I think what we were able to do, and you see with the loss of guys like Jalen Duncan, Spencer Anderson, Jahari Branch, all three guys that have played 3-4 years starting positions here for us on the front. Being able to replace those guys this spring, I've been really happy, especially with a couple of transfer portal additions and Corey Bullock and Gotti Ajade coming in, adding depth and working themselves into roles, as well as Emilio Moran. And then I've been really excited about the development of some of the younger guys like Kyle Long, who's really had a great spring for us.
Mike, I know you're not a guy that likes to say I told you so, but when we did chat about running backs last spring, I remember a lot of folks scratching their head and saying, why does Locks love his running back room? We don't know any of these guys. Did you feel like saying I told you so at one point?
No, man, it ain't about proving you guys wrong. It's about proving us right. And that room proved us right in that, with Antoine Littleton, Roman Hemby, and Kobe McDonald's kind of been the sleeper. Kobe a year ago was the guy that played before those other two and maybe didn't have a great preseason camp for us and found himself in a tough situation. Ramon Brown, the true freshman who played some limited snaps for us a year ago, and we expect him to take on a bigger role within our offense. So a talented room. As we've done around here, we've developed these guys within in-house, and really like the way that running back room is shaping up, as well as the guys up front.
Yeah, by the way, you could have told me that you told me. So I got kids at home, so I'm used to being told I'm wrong all the time. Nothing new to me.
I'm always wrong, man. Ask all the fans, my wife, my family. They'll tell you I'm always wrong.
I think you've been right a couple of times the last few years, especially in the postseason. We'll get to that in a second. But first, let's go to the defense. What becomes easier for Brian Williams after kind of a full year under his belt in that role?
You know what? I think one, B-Dub has been smart enough as a young coach to lean on some of the veteran guys in that room, like Lance Thompson, like Henry Baker. These guys have really worked really well together on the defensive side of the ball. But I think the biggest thing that I love about having B-Dub as our primary play caller on defense is the impact that he has in that room. Those kids love to play for Brian Williams. He has a tremendous effect on young people, and he has a very steady personality. He doesn't let the highs get too high or the lows get too low. And I really like the way he's put together putting our players in the best possible position to make plays, understanding not just what our strengths are, but what our weaknesses are, and making sure we find ways to mitigate exposing ourselves to our weaknesses. So really happy with the job he's done. He's a guy that continues year in and year out. I'm fighting to keep him on my staff because people are trying to poach him, and I think he has a bright future. And someday soon you'll hear about guys like him and Josh Gaddis being head coaches.
Well, and obviously he's helped develop players into NFL talents as well. We expect to hear Jacorian Bennett's name, certainly Deonte Banks' name called on Thursday or Friday. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Deonte being a guy who NFL teams have simply fallen in love with in watching his film. What did other folks miss about him?
You know what? I don't think people really missed anything about him. Another one of those I told you so, speaking to some of my friends at the next level that have come through here. And I can tell you, I'd be very surprised if his name isn't called day one, and I'd be pissed too, because they've wasted a lot of my time, because I get so many calls the last 3-4 days on guys like him and Jalen Duncan, who both have opportunities to maybe go first day and second day. And Deonte has the size, he has the skill set, he has ball skills, he has speed, which he showed at the combine. He had it all. He's a guy that missed a good chunk of his sophomore year. He had surgery there and missed like the last 6 to 7 games. So maybe wasn't a guy that was on the radar of a lot of people, but he's been a 3-year starter for us. He's been a guy that's been really productive for us in terms of, being out on that island. And the NFL likes size, they like speed, they like ball skills. And I think the biggest strength for a guy like Deonte Banks is his mental makeup. I've used the analogy that he's just dumb enough that when he gets beat, it doesn't linger or stay with him, because he gets right back up in the face, and he's going to play man-to-man coverage and not be afraid of whoever the jersey is across from him.
Yeah, and it never hurts when you have guys from the same school that are doing the things that they're doing right now in the NFL, and scouts and GMs can look and say, look at what they're developing. This is a guy that we can plug and play, and I think that's what they're saying right now about Deonte Banks. All right, Locks, before we finish, I do want to go to what I pointed out about the postseason and what you guys have done the last couple of years. After the bowl win in 2021 that made you 7-6, you said that's not good enough. That's not our standard. After last year was 8-5 and another bowl win, and you said our standard needs to keep getting higher and higher. How do you personally measure the growth that you want to see with this program?
Yeah, you know what I've come to learn, and I've spent, this will be 16 seasons here now at the University of Maryland, whether it's as an assistant or a head coach. And so I think I know the lay of the land really well, is that each and every year, our job is to get better and better, but it starts with development. We use the term being a developmental program, and I like that because it means we're always working to get better. And so the way, I look at what determines success for us is, are we better today than we were yesterday? And, last 2 seasons, we've proven ourselves right from that standpoint. And again, we have another opportunity this season. I like the way this team is shaping up. I love the culture that the locker room has. We haven't talked about winning championships around here. And I know our team, they used to get upset because I said, look, don't even talk about championships until you got a foundation. Well, I'm here to say we've got a foundation. And now it is time to start talking about doing the things and putting ourselves in the best possible position with how we play the game to compete for Big Ten championships. And is it going to happen this year? We'll find out here very soon.
Yes, you will. The season arrives awfully quickly. Do you actually get any time here? Everybody's got to recharge their batteries, Locks. I know the transfer portal is seemingly always open and the season gets here faster, but everybody needs a break.
Yeah, we do, man. But, for whatever reason, the NCAA schedule and the calendar hasn't allowed it to happen. I am looking forward. You're not got to twist my arm to speed up the spring game, because I know you got some programming coming up after us. This will be probably the fastest spring game in the history of spring games. And I'm looking forward to getting to my backyard and maybe, use my NIL deal with Julio 42, Don Julio 1942 to relax finally.
You know what? You and I, we got to share agents. I don't know who your guy is, but he's obviously doing something right.
I got a lot of agents. Their last names are Locksley.
Yeah. And they take more than 10%, don't they?
They want more than 10%. I think I only get 10%.
I'll tell you what, Locksley, I'll get you on the bat phone with our programming department. We'll get the spring game done as quickly as possible on Saturday. Mike, it's always great to catch up, have some fun with you. Really looking forward to not just the spring game this Saturday, but the Maryland football season in 2023. We appreciate the time.
Thanks, Rick.
Meanwhile, on the diamond this weekend, Michigan goes non-con. I love these kind of mid to late season non-con, especially when you welcome a top 25 team to your home park. That happens when the Wolverines take on Oklahoma State. See a couple of other key series this weekend, including Maryland, Indiana, Rutgers, Purdue. Those are all important. Iowa, Penn State as well. You can see a lot of those games either on the Big Ten Network or Big Ten Plus. And to break them all down, welcome in Big Ten Network baseball analyst Michael Huff. There is no doubt we have to start with Maryland, Indiana. You start to think about series inside the league with less than a month to go in the regular season. This is as good as it gets.
This really is. I mean, here's your Maryland team that was the only preseason Big Ten team ranked. An Indiana team that is doing everything right. You want to talk about incredibly at home, 22-1, but this ball club, great pitching, great hitting, is putting themselves in that position. But this is the premier series because Maryland is now starting to get into a nice rhythm. Maryland had a couple tough non-conference weekends, but if they can go to Indiana, if they can take 2 out of 3, it's going to be incredibly exciting for them to start feeling like they're back to where they were before the whole season began.
Yeah, Terps have won 5 of 6. Listen, it's not going to be easy. This Indiana team is not just talented, Michael. They're 22-1.
Well, and they have so many guys. I mean, you love the fact that they've got a great freshman. They've got some in center field. You've got your solid guys like the Tibbetts of the world, the Cerny's of the world that are doing what they're doing. But like again, they've got some great pitching going on right now. And so there is a feeling at home for Indiana that this is our house. You're not going to come in and win. And if you do, you're going to have to do everything absolutely perfectly, which, again, for Maryland, they had a guy that throws a perfect game last year, no hitter, so maybe that's what he's going to take.
Yeah, both these teams obviously in the mix, not just for a Big Ten championship, but perhaps an NCAA at-large bid. If they don't win the auto bid, that's why this weekend series is so big for both the Terps and the Hoosiers. As for Iowa, after sweeping Nebraska at home, they go on the road to face Penn State. Now, you look at the records, you look at the stats, you say, well, Iowa's a huge favorite. Penn State's actually been really good at home.
Yeah, Penn State 23-13 overall, so that's not too bad. They've been really good at home. And this is a lineup in Penn State that 1 through 9 all hit. You don't have one guy that's got 15 home runs or one guy that's hitting $150. You've got 9 guys that put the ball in play. So really for Iowa, this is after you just came off this incredible weekend beating a really good Nebraska team. You now have to go on the road and you can't breathe. You can't think, okay, here's a team that's under 500 in the Big Ten, because Penn State is one of those trap weekends that if you start looking past it, knowing that we are now close to being in an RPI that gets us an at-large regardless, like we're going to be into the 30 wins after this weekend regardless, you still have to come out. And again, for Iowa, the 3 big pitchers have to pitch well.
The Friday series opener is right here on Big Ten Network. So fair to say the Hawkeyes probably feel like if they're not going to get the auto bid, this is a weekend that you have to take 2 or 3, even if you're on the road?
Well, not just 2 or 3. I mean, this is the type of thing that they should be thinking about sweep. Now, and again, which is incredibly difficult. But if you want to consider yourself one of the top 64 in the nation, really top 30 when you think about like the at-large, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to show the selection committee, that for the teams that we should beat, we beat. And so, again, they have to be thinking 3, not necessarily 2.
I think Rutgers is probably in a similar situation because the Scarlet Knights have found something over the last couple of weeks, but they, again, go on the road to take on a Purdue team that is dangerous. But the problem is when you look at Purdue as far as like RPI is concerned and strength of schedule, they're pretty far down there. So it's a weekend where if you don't sweep, your own RPI probably suffers a bit.
Yeah, exactly right, which is crazy to think about. Here's a Purdue team that is in the top 8 right now in the standings. This is a Purdue team that I love being the stolen base, walk, triple kind of guy, because they've got 5 or 6 guys that can put incredible pressure on a team, just getting on base, stealing, bunting and running, hitting and running. And so for Rutgers, like you said, they did a great job last weekend of doing what they needed to do. Not just beat Northwestern 2 out of 3, they swept. They're starting to get healthy. Some of the big bats, Chris Brito, are starting to come around. But they have to be thinking, for us to get back into that national picture, again, their second best RPI in the Big Ten. Overall record, not great, but they have to be thinking about taking 3, not just 2.
Yeah, Rutgers has won 6 in a row, and Purdue has struggled a little bit in terms of pitching and defense, allowed at least 6 in the last 4. I think this Rutgers team is a team that is hitting its stride at just the right time, and they're a team that when you get into May, they're going to be a really nasty team to deal with because they're so stacked in the middle of that lineup, not really any place you can pitch around. Northwestern heads to Michigan State, and the Wildcats are struggling. Michigan State has been a great story this year, both individually and team-wise. I don't think a lot was expected of this squad, but Jake Boss Jr. has a team that is in the mix. They're hitting over 310 as a team, and if you hit like that 1 through 9, you could beat just about anybody.
Yeah, and it's very exciting for Michigan State because this has been kind of building, and now Jake has got all the pieces going together. A couple great starters, great reliever, a lineup that puts a lot of pressure on you, and again, a great overall record right now. But like with Iowa, this is one of those traps that, again, a Northwestern first-year coach, clearly the team is a little bit dysfunctional, have some talent, but not really talent-wise like you are. So do you start looking beyond this? Do you start thinking, well, we're going to win this series? Winning this series is not enough for Michigan State. They've got to be thinking of a sweep because if they do, they go from those low 60s RPIs, maybe into the 50s and start to work their way into those 40s and 30s. And again, it's a team that if you don't take all 3, again, you might be dropping in a lot of different ways.
All right, so just down the road in Ann Arbor, I mentioned it's the odd late April non-conference series for Michigan against Oklahoma State. Cowboys come in ranked inside the top 25. Big weekend for Michigan, big weekend for the Big Ten as a league.
Well, exactly. I mean, when you think about the fact that you have a chance to show the entire world what the Big Ten is about. You've got the best pitcher in the Big Ten, Connor O'Halloran. We're going to talk about him a little bit later, going on the mound. You've got to get at least 1 win, if not 2. If not, again, if you can sweep this team that's nationally ranked, it's going to help the entire Big Ten Conference. You've got a great center fielder, John Kim, as a freshman that's doing everything right. But if this ball club, some of the veterans, if they can come around and just play the way they can play and have their pitching staff pitch the way they have in the past, it could be a lot of fun for the Big Ten.
Wolverines took 2 out of 3 from the Spartans last weekend. quickly touch on the last two conference series, Illinois at Ohio State. What should we be watching for?
Well, Illinois keep that momentum going. Again, this is an Ohio State club that, like Northwestern, kind of first-year coach, kind of rebuilding. So can Illinois, who was one of those top 6 teams preseason, work their way back? They're outside, sitting at number 9 right now in the standings. Can they get back into that playoff? And then for Nebraska, I mean, this is going to be so important that, again, having been swept at Iowa, how do you bounce back? You're home. You're facing, again, one of those teams in Minnesota that is not having the type of year that we typically see out of a John Anderson ball club. But you've got to be thinking, if I can take all 3, if I can sweep, I haven't lost really anything. I haven't lost too much ground. I am now in that top 4 or 5 in the Big Ten standings, and you're going to feel good about getting to the playoffs.
Yeah, that Friday series opener also on Big Ten Network. And I think it's an interesting sub-story here, Michael, because a lot of folks tend to forget there's a race to get inside that top 8. It's not just all about getting NCAA-worthy RPI.
No, you want to be in that top 8. You want to be in that top 4. And if I can do that, again, I'm beating teams in the Big Ten. Some of them are going to have good national rankings, good overall records, and those that don't, I have to think about sweeping. But if you can get into that top 4, now all of a sudden you're giving yourself a much better chance to do well in the Big Ten tournament, which then opens eyes for potential at-large if you can't take it all the way through and win it.
Yeah, coaches ask why about that top 4, because that top 4 also means your pitching staff is probably a little bit more well-rested if you have to go to those Saturday games where there could potentially be 4 games on that Saturday. It's big. And remember, change in format. The Big Ten tournament this year starts on a Tuesday instead of a Wednesday. Fewer games each day, perhaps driven by Mother Nature. Either way, Michael and I, all in, no more 3 a.m. shows after the late game. It is time for today's Big Stat presented by Old National Bank. Maryland scored 17 in the second inning of Tuesday's 24-run win at UMBC. It's the most they've scored in any inning in program history. So the Big Stat looks at the total runs scored by Big Ten teams this season. And not surprisingly, Maryland is number 1 with 361. Iowa, Indiana, and Rutgers all over 300 runs scored already this season. We are back with Michael Huff. We've talked teams, series. Now we talk individual players. And obviously there's a lot of discussion when you get to Maryland about guys like Nick LaRusso, who we hope is healthy for the rest of the year. But he's not the only guy doing good work for the Terps. No. Talk about a guy like Ian Petrutz, another guy who can really hurt opposing pitching.
Well, and for Ian, he's like going to be really important right now. Here's a bulky, big, strong guy that you are hoping steps up for the home run, the RBI production that you might be missing with Nick LaRusso. This is a team, as we just saw, whole lot of runs scored. This is a team that was the only Big Ten preseason team ranked. And again, had a couple bad weekends playing some nationally ranked opponents in the non-con schedule, but now they seem to be finding their rhythm. But really, as I look at this weekend, with the fact that LaRusso might be not 100%, a guy like Ian Petrutz really has to step up.
And really playing well as of late, hitting more than 400, has 10 RBIs in the last 5 games. And he talked about those non-con struggles by Maryland, but they continue to win Big Ten series after Big Ten series. Exactly what we talked about just a few minutes ago. They need to continue to do that this weekend. Michigan State has been one of the more fascinating teams to watch. And when we talked with Jake Boss Jr. a couple of weeks ago, he said it may be cliche, but when you're really good up the middle, you're going to be really good, and that's been the case for the Spartans all year.
Well, at just about every team, major leagues, minor leagues, college, high school, if you have a solid catcher, middle infield, center fielder, that's going to cover up a lot of mistakes that your pitchers do. And for Michigan State, it's almost their entire infield. We've talked about that Brock Vradenberg leading the Big Ten in hitting, but I love the middle, up the middle combination. Trent Farquhar and Mitch Jebb. We've talked about Mitch in the past, doing great in the Cape last summer, number 3 overall prospect in the Cape at the end of the summer. But I really think for Michigan State, now you're playing a Northwestern team like we talked about, that you should be thinking sweep, not just taking 2 out of 3. But for these middle infielders, if they can play solid defensively, keep being the table setters that they are, keep hitting those line drives, forget about the power. For those guys from Michigan State to continue to have that success, get on base, play the solid leather, and you're going to win a bunch of games.
8-3 in their last 11. I'll tell you, if Michigan State gets really good pitching in May, they're not a team that anybody wants to face in Omaha at the Big Ten tournament. Nebraska probably falls into that same category.
Yes.
I mean, they just get guys raking all over the place. I know they're coming off that sweep against Iowa, need to get back on track, but when you have guys like Anderson and Matthews, it's not hard to get back on track.
No. And again, those two did a really nice job over the weekend against Iowa, but Iowa pitching, you got to tip your cap sometimes. But again, for these two guys, I think have to continue to do what they do. For Nebraska to be able to bounce back, this is a series that you can get healthy. If you take 3, you're right back where you were in the top 4 or 5 in the Big Ten standings. But you think about Bryce Matthews, you think about Max Anderson. These guys, 2 and 3 in batting average, like 1 and 4 in home runs in the Big Ten. Like, these two can do things offensively that are incredible. But I also love the fact that they are solid defensively. And if they can do that, they're going to give Nebraska a really good chance to take 3.
And the midweek win kind of takes some of the sting out of that sweep and gets you back in the swing of things before you head into another Big Ten series. Iowa is predicated on pitching. Hawkeyes can hit, we know that, but they're going to win games most of the time with their arm. Brody Brecht is a guy who they need to be consistent throughout the course of the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, here's a guy in Brody Brecht. I mean, you have 3 great starters for Iowa. And again, typically a team that you think more pitching than hitting. This year, we've seen how many runs they can score. But for Brody Brecht, might be the top pitching prospect out of the Big Ten. A guy, again, we've talked about can rush up there 100 miles an hour. Leading the Big Ten, tied for first in strikeouts, but way too many walks, okay? This is a guy that, again, I almost harken back to my days when I came up in the major leagues with the Dodgers, hearing about the legendary Sandy Koufax, and that it took a certain pitching coach to say, don't throw so hard. Like, you have such incredible stuff. Just relax, hit the strike zone, hit the glove, trust your catchers, and all of a sudden he turned into this perennial all-star. So for Brody Brecht, again, he's that sort of Friday, Saturday. He's the guy that everyone talks about. If he can find the strike zone more, again, really puts Iowa in a really good position.
Sounds like what I tell you on the golf course. Hope don't try to hit it 290. 260 in the center of the fairway is just fine. Connor O'Halloran of Michigan, a guy who just continues to give the Wolverines good innings.
Yeah, and again, Connor is tied for first in strikeouts in the Big Ten. Now, granted, he's also first in the Big Ten with innings pitched. But here's a guy, when you are facing an Oklahoma State team, great overall record, good hitting ball club. If Connor can come out and win his start, this is not only going to help a Michigan ball club continue to feel good about themselves, maybe a little ahead of schedule, Tracy Smith's first year, but it's also going to help every other team in the Big Ten. Because once one of our top teams beats those nationally ranked teams, all of a sudden it brings up the strength of schedule for everybody. So I'm really hoping that Connor O'Halloran can have that type of game.
It could be an RPI weekend, not just for Michigan, but for the entire
Big Ten.
All right, we'll go start to finish. We began with Maryland hitting. Now we finish with Maryland pitching. And Jason Savakul, a guy who last year really came out of the box and had some great starts and then a little bit of a fade toward the end. And they need him, obviously, as part of that pitching staff if Maryland wants to be where it wants to be at the end of the year.
Right, and that's part of the reason that Maryland was ranked preseason nationally, because here was a guy that had thrown a no-hitter last year. Here was a guy that worked his way up from that Saturday, Sunday into that Friday starter for a great Maryland ball club and was coming back. So you look at this guy and maybe unrealistic expectations. You're looking for a 2 ERA, maybe a 1 ERA, and he's 3s, which is great. But he needs to have that magic. He needs to find that rhythm, get back into the zone. Not necessarily no hitting zone, because we know where they're playing. Indiana, probably not going to happen. But if he can be that starter that we saw last year, first part of last year, he's really going to help that Maryland ball club.
Yeah, what a great weekend on the Big Ten baseball diamond. I think we know a lot more heading into May as the end of April rolls in through this weekend. Get a couple of NCAA contenders playing against each other, an important non-con. All that on the schedule this week in the world of Big Ten baseball.